Hi everybody, hope you had a great Friday and welcome again to this edition of What's It To Ya with Carter and Jack. A lot to get to on tonight's show. Major League Baseball has announced it's going to ban most home plate collisions come the next baseball season on an experimental basis. We're going to discuss whether or not banning home plate collisions is a good idea and also whether this rule is going to be a good rule come next baseball season, whether or not it'll actually work. Elsewhere in sports, the Sochi Olympics are now in the books, but we're going to talk about some of the sports that caught our eyes, the sports that you should be watching before the next Olympics roll around in 2018. Plus, your social media question of the week is coming up. And in this week's debate, we're taking two timeless baseball records. Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hit streak and Cal Ripken's record for the most consecutive games played, and asking the simple question, which one of them is better? Plus my parting shot, the college basketball team that is by far the most underrated in America. What's It To Ya starts right now.
So light 'em up, light 'em up, light 'em up, I'm on fire. So light 'em up, light 'em up, light 'em up, I'm on fire.
And hi everybody, welcome once again to this edition of What's It To Ya. Alongside Jack Worth, I am Carter Woodiel. We're going to start tonight's show with baseball. The season is just about a month or so away now from opening day, and it looks like the 2014 season is going to have one big difference in terms of the rule book, at least on an experimental basis. Home plate collisions are now, for the most part, being outlawed. The new rule that Major League Baseball announced today does not going to ban all home plate collisions. It bans all of them except for when the catcher has the ball or when the catcher is about to field a throw to home plate. It's a little bit more limited, kind of represents a compromise between the owners and the players union. This isn't quite a sweeping ban, but Jack, I want to know what you think of this. Is a rule okay to stop home plate collisions? And do you think this is the right rule?
Well, I think the rule to stop home plate collisions is long overdue. When we look at home plate collisions, from my point of view, is so just uncharacteristic of the sport of baseball. It's unnecessary. I never understood it. You can't collide with the third baseman when you're sliding into third base. And I don't understand why we have this. The catcher's dressed like a football player, so we're allowed to treat him like a football player. So I think the rule, it doesn't go far enough, but that's to be expected from a sport like baseball, which is so very averse to change. This is the first rule. I think the rule after the season, once we all come to realize that the sanctity of baseball remains intact, despite that players aren't colliding into each other, we can extend the rule further in the future.
I don't think that's the big issue here. I totally agree with you. You mentioned treating the catcher like a football player. That's a great metaphor here. We don't want any baseball players turning into football players after they retire. And these plays, contribute to concussions, contribute to some serious injuries. And you're right, they're unnecessary. But I am not a big fan of this rule, mostly because when I first saw it come out, I looked on, I saw on my Twitter feed, oh, look at that, they're banning home plate collisions. Oh, that's wonderful. I look and I read the article, and it takes me 10 minutes to really digest what the rule actually is. There are so many components to it. It's like, well, if the catcher, can be called for blocking the plate unless he's fielding a ball. What does he mean if he's fielding a ball? Does that mean if the ball's right in front of him? Does that mean if the outfielder is winding up and ready to throw the ball? I mean, there's so much gray area there. And you expect an umpire, a catcher, and a runner to memorize all that and get it done in a split second? I feel like you need a sweeping ban if for anything for this particular rule.
Well, I agree, and I think this rule specifically is unnecessarily convoluted, but at both sides, the players and the owners, I think, see this rule as a one-year sort of first step. I think both sides can agree, going forward, this is not going to be the rule. One will sort of be changed either one way or the other.
But it was weird to me that the players' union's argument for saying that, okay, it's a one-year experiment was, well, it's going to be too hard to teach the players to adapt to a new rule, a new sweeping ban. Are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. These are professional athletes. These are professional athletes who have been sliding into home plate since they were little leaguers.
And sliding into every other base.
Yeah, and sliding into every other base. Like, oh, they can't learn in a month of spring training this new rule. That's preposterous to me. I feel like that's a terrible excuse for not issuing a sweeping ban that I think you and I agree Major League Baseball desperately needs right now.
And I think when we look at it's the most dangerous play in baseball.
Yeah.
And it's a play in baseball that just doesn't make sense. If the throw is beating you to the plate and the catcher's holding onto the ball, why should you be allowed to run him over? It's an argument, and it's something that doesn't even come up that often. It's a rare occurrence, but it's an occurrence that when it happens, the risk of injury is so high that I don't see where it balances out to a favorable rule once you take in all we know about concussions in today's sports. But let's move on. Staying with baseball, the New York Yankees, who a couple months ago looked primed to trade away last year's starting outfielder Brett Gardner.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say inexplicably, but unexpectedly signed him to a 4-year, $50 million contract with a club option to pick him up for a 5th year. I'll start with you. You love Brett Gardner.
I am a big fan of Brett Gardner. And one of the reasons I'm a big fan of him is that he's the only homegrown player in the Yankees starting lineup right now. And it's not even close. So I feel like if you're the Yankees, locking up a homegrown guy makes a ton of sense. But I'm really surprised that, A, the Yankees went in and signed him to an extension before his contract ran out, which is something they almost never do. They tried with Robinson Cano and they couldn't do it. It's like they usually go, they tried with Russell Martin, was another guy that they did it with recently. But usually, they only do it unless they feel like they really need to secure a guy, which I don't think was the case with Brett Gardner here. And in the comments, Brian Cashman said afterwards, he said, I'm just repeating what I said in the winter. I love everything about Gardy. I think he's a part of the solution here. He would be a leadoff hitter and playing center field for most organizations. I knew I was a big fan of Brett Gardner. I had no idea Brian Cashman was such a big fan of Brett Gardner.
Well, it really is interesting because Gardner's name was floated around in the offseason to be, as a candidate to be traded. Obviously, the Yankees outfield is very crowded. I think this is Cashman giving Gardner a confidence boost.
Yeah.
Because Gardner obviously knows this is something they don't do. But when Cashman comes to him in spring training and offers him this great extension just months after being traded, it really brings up Gardner's confidence level. So if Gardner was always in their long-term plans, this is a really good move. I'm just not a fan because I don't think Gardner necessarily needs to be in the long-term plan for the Yankees.
I think he should be. I think because he's a homegrown guy, he's proven to be a huge problem for any opposing team when he's on the base paths. He is an incredible defensive outfielder. He has a great range. You want to talk about guys. Derek Jeter. I think Brett Gardner is kind of like the anti-Derek Jeter in a lot of respects. Where if you look at him, through the eyes of the conventional guy, with Derek Jeter, you look and say, oh, he's a pretty good shortstop, and the metrics tell you he's a terrible shortstop. With Gardner, you look, oh, he's a pretty good outfielder, and the metrics tell you he's a great outfielder. And I think, bottom line here, the Yankees need to keep some form of homegrown talent in their plan, for future seasons. Locking up Brett Gardner makes total sense to me.
Well, I mean, you say that obviously Derek Jeter is going to retire at the end of the season, which
Yeah.
would leave Gardner as the only homegrown player on the team, but I just don't think that should matter. I know, maybe it matters to some fans, but at the end of the day, I feel like you should analyze the situation as to what helps you on the field the best. I would have loved to see another season to sort of analyze what he's going to do, because let's remember, he stole over 45 bases 2 years in a row, missed a full year with injury, and then sort of unexplainably cut that number in half to 24. So I think I would love to have seen another year, and then maybe the year ends, the Yankees see who's going to be a free agent, they can look at the situation better.
But I feel like it's not that simple. If you saw how much money the Yankees had to fork over to get Jacoby Ellsbury onto their team this year. If Brett Gardner had a great year, stole another 40, 45 bases, he would then become a huge free agent target, and then it would be another case of Yankees overspending. And they avoid that here with this extension.
But they don't. Well, they avoid it. If that's a possibility, I don't think Gardner is going to transform into a superstar player. I think that if Gardner posts numbers comparable to what he has done, which is hit 270, steal 30 bases, and maybe double digits in home runs, then yeah, they're looking at a $50 million 4-year extension at the end of the season. I think they could get him with that. Gardner said, "There's nowhere else that I want to be but New York City." I would have liked to see the Yankees watch Gardner play for another year.
It seems like the Yankees front office has been just plain unpredictable recently. Let's move now from the summer game to the Winter Olympics. We're going to talk about the Winter Olympics. They're already over. The closing ceremonies were on Sunday. We saw one of my favorite parts of those closing ceremonies was where they had that homage to the mistake they made in the opening ceremony with the people forming Olympic rings, and one of them just stayed in a circle. Anyway, I just love bringing that up whenever possible. But in the athletic events, the Winter Games are often a showcase of things that people here in America don't usually care about at all. And I want to talk about some of the stuff that jumped out to you and me, Jack, that Americans maybe should care about.
Well, the Winter Olympics is a collection of games no one cares about it. In fact, even ice hockey, it takes 2 weeks every 4 years for Americans to care about ice hockey,
Yep.
really. But my favorite sport of this year's Winter Olympics, that's biathlon.
Yep.
It's a sport that has so much strategy that the casual viewer wouldn't necessarily see because, yeah, it's really easy in that first lap to just ski as fast as you can, but then maybe you're just that much more tired for the shooting. And if you're off by a hair, that's a minute extra added to your time, or a penalty lap depending on the race. And you can be out of the competition like that. So there's so much little bits of strategy in biathlon that I think make it great. Just another mention, it has the mass start, which was my favorite event specifically because, again, they're all starting at the same time.
And they're all diving for the finish if it's close, which is really interesting. I do not want to leave this segment without talking about curling. I lucked out. I've got a study hall from 11 o'clock to 11:45. I've got lunch from 11:45 to 12:30, and it lines up perfectly with the evening curling session in Sochi. I was watching 2-3 games at a time on my laptop on the live streaming service. I was going home watching the tape delay of Team USA matches at 5 o'clock. I thought the announcing was great. I thought the coverage wasn't live, and that was extremely frustrating, but otherwise it was great. And I am a huge fan of curling.
Curling, and we watching the Americans, the Americans were severely disappointed in their 2014 appearance curling, which poses the question, while we're talking about which sport should fans pay attention to, can we extend that past just fans paying attention to watching, and should America as a whole be paying more attention to the Curling Association? Should we devote more time and effort into breeding top curlers so we're not a joke at the Winter Olympics?
It's a big issue, and basically the choice that the USA is making is, do we have grassroots curlers? Do we have a dream that's in place where you could say, I could form a team and I could go all the way to the Olympic trials, win the Olympic trials tournament in Fargo, and go and represent my team at the Olympics? Or are you going to create kind of an elite professional class, which have been done by countries like Scotland and China and Sweden and other big medal contenders, and then win Olympic medals? The big question is, how do you define success? Olympic medal winnings, or success at the lower levels of the sport? And that's the decision that USA has to make right now.
And it's a sport that, if they were to create that elite sort of upper class of curling training and breeding young curlers, personally, I have no idea. Would it be successful? Is the sport popular enough at a youth level that we could successfully do that?
For me, when I'm watching it, I saw a great line by the NBC host who was hosting. He said, well, when they turned on curling, they didn't know what they were watching, but they couldn't look away. And I'm looking at curling, and it's exciting, it's suspenseful, it's a team, they're extremely competitive athletes going in for the final shot, the last rock, and it's a great sport to watch. And even though it's not that way, you look at it and say, hey, I could do that, even though you can't, it's extremely difficult. But it's something that you can be motivated to go out and do. And I think if they create more opportunities for that to happen, then that could be something that we can make it thrive here in the USA. But there are a lot of tough decisions that have to be made before we get there. The Winter Olympics will be back in 2018. I'll be glued to the curling when that happens, no doubt. But when we come back, we're going to talk college basketball, your social media question of the week, our picks, way too early, but our picks for the number 1 seeds come NCAA tournament time, and the debate of the week, which is the better record? Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak or Cal Ripken's streak of most consecutive games played? Find out next.
Slow down.
Slow down and move over.
And move over.
When you see lights,
vests,
Or reflectors.
please give us some room. Slow down and move over.
when you need us.
We've got your back.
Do you have ours?
You got our back?
You got ours? You got our back?
Please, slow down.
And move over.
My songs know what you did in the dark.
And welcome back. This is What's It To You with Carter and Jack. I'm still Carter Woodiel. He is still Jack Worth, and we can't wait to get the second half of our show started. We're going to start with the social media question of the week. This week it comes from our good friend Bobby, and he asks, do you think it's at all possible that the Jim Boeheim reaction, Jim Boeheim, the head coach of the Syracuse Orange, and the subsequent loss by Syracuse at Duke on Saturday could end up costing the Orange a #1 seed for March Madness? I look at this question and I see two questions. One, was Jim Boeheim's action appropriate? And if you don't know, go look it up. It's incredible to watch. Jim Boeheim Syracuse was called for a charging foul on what looked like it was a game-tying layup in the game against Duke at Cameron Indoor Stadium. And when the call was made, Jim Boeheim was furious. He ran onto the court. He tried his best to take off his jacket, couldn't quite do it, and put it back on, and yelled at the ref, cursing, swearing, was given 2 technicals, and was thrown out of the game. So the big question is, is this an appropriate reaction from Jim Boeheim given the call? And then also, how are the number 1 seeds going to shape up? Let's start with your opinion of what Jim Boeheim did on Saturday.
Well, Jim Boeheim, if the question is, was he justified to yell? Jim Boeheim can yell all he wants. When, if the ref makes a call against your team, you can go out and yell. But you're going to get teed up.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
If Boeheim wants to yell, he can yell. I mean, I'm not against coaches yelling, but there's a penalty. They will get technical. Their teams will receive technical fouls. Jim Boeheim was ejected from the basketball game. Swung the game huge the other way. Duke shot consecutive free throws. I think the tees were justified. Anyone who watched the clip saw Boeheim
the
running
tees were
out
justified.
on the court.
Yeah.
The technical fouls were justified.
Right, absolutely. And I think the bigger question is, I think Jay Billis, when he was calling the game for ESPN, Jay Billis is an incredible analyst. And what he said during that was, he said, well, the call happened. Jim Boeheim lost the game for Syracuse. The call did not end the game. Syracuse would have had Duke inbounding the ball with 10 seconds left, down by 2 points. Jim Boeheim gets teed up. Duke makes 3 or 4 free throws from 2 technical fouls, and the game is done. It's a stupid reaction by Jim Boeheim. And then when you take in when Syracuse played Maryland on Monday night, and he went in, and Mark Turgeon, the head coach of Maryland, said that a foul should have been called in the last play, he responds, well, first off, let me tell you this. They shot 27 free throws. If anyone is going to complain about the officiating, it should be me. Because if the other team shoots free throws, that means they're biased, not because the other team is going to the line more because they drive more against your 2-3 zone. It makes no sense to me. I think Jim Boeheim needs to stop whining.
Well, yeah, because that's the thing. Charge blocking fouls has been described as the toughest call a basketball ref can
You needed a frame-by-frame video replay to see it.
And this happens every game. Most games it doesn't happen in this sort of situation with less than a minute left in the game on the line. But this is a situation that always happens, and whichever way it goes, the other team's coach is going to get upset. So this is something that Jim Boeheim needs to understand, that even though he's Jim Boeheim, he's still a basketball coach. Yeah. And when the call goes against you, you have to respect the rules of the game. And if you don't want to respect the rules of the game, you will get teed up, and the other team will shoot free throws. And in this case, it cost them the game.
Let's fast forward now, take a look at how the number 1 seeds are going to shake up. Bobby asked, well, is Syracuse going to fall out from a number 1 seed? I think right now, today, if the season ended today, Syracuse would be a number 1 seed. But I think that it's going to change by the time it's all said and done. What say you, Jack?
Well, I think right now, if we're talking about locked-in number 1 seeds, I'm going to say Wichita State.
Absolutely.
Depending on what the committee says, their resume should be locked in. They'll go undefeated. If the committee doesn't want to give them number 1 seed, that has nothing to do with their on-court performance. But I think they will get one. Another team nearly locked in, Florida. They play in the Southeastern Conference. I don't think they'll have trouble running the table.
SEC basketball is
winning the conference tournament should not be much of a challenge. That leaves 2 remaining. I really like Kansas. Right now, if you look at the rankings, they're outside of that top 4 that would be number 1 seeds. But I think, they've won their 94th Big 12 championship in a row. They're going to win the conference tournament. I think that'll be enough. Presumably, they'll beat a Kansas State, Oklahoma in the semifinals. They'll beat a Texas in the finals. That should bump them up to the number 1. So then that last number 1, going back to the ACC, the 2 teams we were just talking about, Syracuse and Duke. Right now, Syracuse is certainly slotted ahead of Duke. If the tournament were to begin today, it would be Cuse. That being said, I like Cuse moving forward also, because I don't think Duke is going to win the ACC tournament, which is what it would take for them to get number 1 seed.
And that's where we disagree. I feel like, though, just given Duke's history, given Mike Krzyzewski's history of winning neutral site games and winning games at the ACC tournament, I know it's way too early to predict this, but I think there will be a number 1 seed on the line when Syracuse and Duke play in the ACC tournament, whenever they wind up playing. And I think Duke is going to win that game and take that final number 1 seed. I agree with you on the other 3. I think Kansas has plenty of teams to beat. Wichita State should be the overall number 1. I think the committee will give them that, and Florida in there the second number 1 seed. It's looking like to be a great top 4 in the tournament.
It's going to be a great top 4, and let's go back to the top 4 in the ACC. It brings up also a really interesting question. Let's say we're both sort of right and wrong. Syracuse loses to Duke, but then Duke falls to Virginia in the ACC title. That's how I could see another team sneaking in there, like in Arizona, who could climb, because I don't think the committee wants to give number 1 seed to Arizona, to Syracuse or Duke if neither of them are conference champs.
Well, yeah, and it's strange because this loss means a lot more because it's right before Selection Sunday. In fact, if it was in the SEC Championship game, it would be on Selection Sunday. That's the way it works sometimes. We're going to transfer over now to our debate of the week. We're going to talk 2 famous streaks in baseball. Cal Ripken set the record for most consecutive games played with a shocking 2,632, and Joe DiMaggio hit safely in 56 consecutive games. Let's start with you, Jack. Which side are you taking?
Well, these are both 2 streaks that sort of define longevity. I think these 2 streaks, combined with Hank Aaron's streak of appearing in an All-Star game for 21 consecutive seasons, is 25 overall, sort of show the longevity records in baseball. But, the city of Baltimore could theoretically burn my house down collectively from what I'm about to say, but I think the Ripken streak is overrated. I think it's blown out of proportion. I'm not a fan. I think Ripken's a great player, which is especially what bugs me, that Ripken's career is defined by the streak, which is overrated again.
I understand if you're defined by a streak, that's one thing. I'm shocked that you could possibly say this is an overrated streak. You're talking about going the better part of 17 years without even missing a single game. What's the most basic thing, the most important thing a ball player does? It's show up and play. What we're talking about with the Yankees, Brian Roberts can't play because he always gets hurt. Mark Teixeira can't play because he's going to get hurt. But that was never a problem with Cal Ripken. He was always in the lineup. He was in the lineup for 2,632 consecutive games, breaking Lou Gehrig's record, which was thought to be unbeatable until Cal Ripken broke the mark, and his mark is now thought to be unbeatable today.
But I think we can agree, looking at stats, that it actually hurt the team in some circumstances.
Oh.
Yeah, Cal Ripken Jr. in June was a 299 hitter. His slugging was 462. In September, after having played a full season, his batting average went down to 244 with a 340 slugging. That's 120 points of slugging lost in September versus June.
But I feel like just if you look at how wonderful his streak is, we're not talking about how, what's the best record in regard to the strategic decisions made by the player's team. We're talking about which is more impressive. This is extremely impressive. And I want to hear what your argument is for the 56-game hitting streak, because for me, I think that's a little bit overrated. Because I look at the 56-game hitting streak, and I see Joe DiMaggio basically putting together the greatest statistical oddity in the history of Major League Baseball. And he's a guy who hits well, who gets on base a lot, happened to do it in a big string of games. That doesn't represent, just because he hit in 56 consecutive games, doesn't say anything about his character, doesn't say, a lot, or at least nearly as much as what Cal Ripken's record says about him and what kind of ball player he is.
Well, you say statistical oddity, and it may be a statistical oddity, but it's a statistical oddity that has basis in performance on the field. Whereas Cal Ripken it's not a statistical oddity, but you can play 2,600 games and still not make a difference on the field. What Joe DiMaggio did...
Cal Ripken did make a difference on the field.
Which has nothing to do with his streak.
Well, I think it does. I think the fact that he played really well during that streak makes the record that much more impressive. And I think that, Joe DiMaggio's average during his 56-game hitting streak was 408. That's a great average. But if you're telling me, okay, he hit 408 over a 56-game span, and this guy played 17 years without missing a game, and was an all-star, and was one of the best players ever, one of the best shortstop and third baseman ever during this streak, which one's more impressive? Come on.
But that's the thing. His streak isn't defined by anything. His streak is defined by every day running out between second and third base. There were stretches where he went 0 for 30 and was asked by the coach to sit a game. Ripken just said, no, I'm going to keep playing, and he continued to go 0 for 4.
But I feel like streaks and slumps are a natural part of the game. It's the reason why, Joe DiMaggio's hitting streak isn't as big of a one as this, because you can go on a hot streak, you can go on a slump. That's just the luck of the draw. That's what happens from time to time. The streak consecutive games played is not like that at all. And the streak for Joe DiMaggio, he had, out of those 56 games, only 16 of them were multi-hit games. Only 16 of them were 2-hit games. He had 1 3-hit game, and the rest 1 for 4, 1 for 5. Really not all that impressive to me compared to what Cal Ripken did.
Game 57, the game DiMaggio did not get a hit in. He was able to get on base. He drew a walk, went 0 for 3 with a walk. After that, he then hit in 16 consecutive more. He reached base in 73 consecutive games. He went up to the plate, and he did his job.
Cal Ripken went onto the field and did his job for 17
No, because
years.
Ripken's job is to help his team win games.
And he did that.
He did that sometimes.
by
and
being
other
one of the best
times he
shortstops
didn't.
and third baseman in the history of baseball.
And what happens with this record is, for some reason, the fact that Ripken is always out there at shortstop, he never missed a game, gives us the delusion that this somehow made him a good guy. Like, this was like, wow, Cal Ripken.
Well, come on. If you saw that incredible scene after he breaks the record, if the game becomes official, 22 minutes standing ovation from the entire stadium at Camden Yards. There's a whole lap around the warning track. Incredibly heartwarming moment. That adds to the greatness of the record, doesn't it?
That
Yes.
makes the record more ridiculous.
No,
because
it
it's like,
doesn't.
let's
come
pause
on.
the game for 22 minutes.
For 17 consecutive years.
Because for 17 consecutive years, he just played a lot.
He didn't just play a lot. And listen, the bottom line here is, if somebody goes in and breaks Joe DiMaggio's hitting streak, hypothetically, we say, great, he had a great run, good for him. If somebody goes out there and breaks Cal Ripken's record of 2,632 consecutive games played, we're talking about him being one of the all-time greats in baseball.
But how come, why is Cal Ripken, why we can't say Cal Ripken is a selfish player who continued this streak?
Because he's such a great player.
Because you can't be a great player and be selfish?
Yeah, but I'm not saying that this record is selfish compared
think-
to the 56-game hitting streak.
I think this is a bit of a selfish record.
No, it's not.
This is a bit of like, no, it's.
But that's what records are. Records are individual accomplishments.
I think it's a selfish record.
Every record is selfish. Every record is individual.
But Joe DiMaggio didn't. It's not he didn't choose to be selfish about it. It's not like he had a choice whether or not he could get a hit, and he was like, yes, because I just want that record.
I think that this record is good enough to deserve that treatment from Cal Ripken. If anybody breaks it, which won't happen, by the way, it's one of the best players ever to live. We are running out of time, and I'm going to get to my parting shot, and I'm going to talk about another streak. I'm going to talk about a streak that's happening right now. The 29 consecutive games the Wichita State Shockers have won. They're 29-0 this season, and yet they're ranked second in both polls. Why? I don't understand why the only undefeated team in the country isn't ranked number 1 overall. And I know what you're thinking. You're saying, but wait, the Wichita State Shockers are in the Missouri Valley Conference, which is not having a good year. They haven't played any competition. False. Wichita State is a top 10 victory. Not just a top 10 victory, a top 10 victory on the road. When did that happen, you ask? On December 1st in non-conference play where they beat the St. Louis Billikens, widely considered to be one of the best, if not the best defensive team in the country on the road, 75-70. I know it was early. I know that it was a game that has been long in the past and that the Billikens weren't ranked as high as they are now. But the Wichita State Shockers are undefeated. And if you've got one win, not to mention wins against Tennessee and BYU, one of those teams is going to make the tournament, if not both of those teams, you deserve to be ranked number 1, and I think the Shockers are extremely underrated, and I hope, and I really do think, they'll be the number 1 overall seed come March Madness. And that's all the time we've got for you here on What's It To You. Thanks so much for watching. Remember, you must subscribe to our YouTube channel and keep blowing up our Facebook and Twitter pages with all of your questions and opinions and hot takes, and we promise to read them on the air. For now, we say goodbye.